Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And it is true that last time I was at this building was in 2020. So brave new post-COVID world, right, ladies and gentlemen? When we have to ask questions, did we actually meet in person? So a little background on me. It is kind of amazing when anybody says you've been in a field for 40 years. One of the things about being this far up the road is that we learn things that can be important to us, and they're so important to us that we try to engage others. And that's really how I met Dr. Gibson. I had, and you'll see some examples on the program today, I learned over time that prevention through design was an incredibly powerful process. And I think Dr. Gibson laid out in a beautiful way the fundamentals on how professionals like yourselves can implement these processes to really improve every aspect of what you do. And so the short story is that I had tried to bring the idea to the University of Arizona, where I was working at the time, to their engineering group, to their engineering college, and people were very nice and listened to the idea about how prevention through design could be implemented in the curriculum, in the research, but unfortunately it didn't really evolve. So somebody said, Mark, you should go up the road, get north of the Gila River, if you will, on I-10 and go to Arizona State University because they have a large engineering school. And there's this guy up there by the name of Ed Gibson who we might be able to hook you up with. And in 2012, through another contact who worked here, Ed and I met over lunch, and we learned we were kind of on the same bandwidth about the importance of prevention through design. And at the time, he was teaching a class in engineering ethics. Am I right, Ed? Or something like that. You were involved in the engineering ethics area, and you felt that there was a relationship between being, ethical practice in engineering and prevention through design. So that begat more conversations and bringing more people into the mix through the American Society of Safety Engineers, and ultimately through the efforts of people like Ed and David and others. The National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health gave a $100,000 grant for these workshops, but also to provide resources to students and working professionals. So it's kind of it's a big deal coming up to the building, and I was there when he was fighting the good fight on prevention through design in this building. Anyway, it's a real privilege to be here today and to be able to talk to people who are really going to chart the future in terms of your engineering practice. Okay, so I want to talk about just briefly the engineering code of ethics, and in particular the #1 canon that engineers have adopted in their creed is engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public and shall strive to comply with the principles of sustainable development in the performance of their duties. So when you look at the big picture in terms of why you're doing what you're doing, including your undergraduate and graduate degrees, this is foundational. So I like to think about it as really prevention through design and your adherence to your canon of ethics is a good marriage. It's a very logical way of thinking. So one of the themes in Ed's presentation was hazard identification, am I right? Finding ways of properly measuring the risk quotient out there and incorporating that into your design. And it's very, very consistent with the canon. So I just wanted to mention that. If I go back to my title, canned corn, what the heck does canned corn have to do with safety? Well, here we go. Sorry. Hierarchy of control, sorry. This relates more to the foundational aspects of the environment and how engineering controls is certainly preferable to administrative controls. Again, I'm going to use your example, Ed, on the parapet height on top of this building. It's a lot more difficult given the vagaries of human behavior, as we like to talk about it, to say, well, stay away from that 31-inch parapet rather than building it high enough so that regardless if you're having a good day or a bad day, you're not going to fall over it. It makes sense, but even the best efforts are sometimes not really dealt with, even though we know the option is really just to add somewhat in the cost, admittedly, but you don't have to worry about it. I've even heard people talk about, like, the answer to people falling off roofs is not to build proper barriers and engineering control, but just admonish folks to stay away from the edge of the roof. Now, that's crazy. I see smiles out there, right? But the example of the parapet is not that far off. Okay, so let's press on. This is what I actually hope to do today. This is one man's experience, all right? So part of it is my personal journey that I wanted to share with you as a person who, when I was in graduate school, as you'll see, I was very naive in terms of design issues, right? And if we're smart, we learn. And that's part of what I'm going to show you today. We're going to touch upon some of the common processes, again, based on my experience. And that's why, again, I'm going to use this word privilege. To be here with people who are going to really create the modern world when I'm long gone is really fantastic. And to be in an institution like Arizona State University, which prides itself, it's kind of funny talking to a U of A guy who's wearing an ASU shirt today, but prides itself on sustainability, right, and innovation. This is an example of taking an idea and incorporating it into one of the best engineering schools in the country. Okay, so real quickly, you can do the math, but this was back in the 70s. Even as a graduate school, was given an opportunity to do an internship at a local cannery. I was in northern Illinois, which is a big agricultural area, and there were several food processing plants in northern Illinois, not far from where I went to school in DeKalb. So I was really jazzed about the prospect of working as the safety guy, and I went to the plant and I found out a couple of things really quickly. Talk about safety culture. First of all, the plant was built about 1900. although some might say it might have even predated 1900. It had been there for years. It was part of the local economic scene. And I learned more than I care to admit right now about canning sweet corn, lima beans, and sweet peas. I don't know if any of those foods appeal to you, but one of the great bennies that we had is at the end of our week, and by the way, this is part of the problem, but at the end of the week we could run out to the corn dock where 10,000-pound loads of fresh sweet corn were dumped from dump trucks, and we would run out there and grab a dozen ears. And my wife lived in Elgin, Illinois. She was also a graduate student, and we would run up to Elgin where the pot of hot water was, waiting for the fresh sweet corn. My point is that at the end of the week, I had only worked what was that? I guess 72 hours during the week. I had the short shift. The tradition at the time was that for the workers, they worked 12 hours a day with no days off. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not talking about 1875. I'm talking about 1975, because the culture and the mentality was we need to get the product in the cans. And to do that, I was one of the lucky ones. I had one day off to rest. Nobody else did. I mean, I said nobody else did. The nice ladies on the line, they worked for 5, 6 months without a day off. Now, do you see a problem with that? Have you heard of the word fatigue? And I was introduced to somebody, hazard identification, they had, in order to strip the corn off the cobs, I didn't think I'd be talking to graduate students about corn, but I am today. In order to strip the corn off the cobs, they had these razor-sharp cutters that were unguarded. In 1975. This is like out of Charles Dickens novels. And somebody that I didn't know until I arrived at the plant, he came every week to get his check, workers' comp. One leg was cut off because he fell into one of these corn cutters. So even as a young student, I thought, what's going on here? Why wasn't the company more interested in solving the problem than allowing that kind of exposure? So that was a rude awakening. That was really a rude awakening for me. Here's another thing that happened to me. So my mid-career was I went into healthcare safety. And the local hospital, Tucson Medical Center, had a construction project which required the excavation of a basement parking area next to a new building that was also going up. This required some way of stabilizing the excavation using tiebacks. And the day dawned like any other. We were, obviously the job was contracted out for this particular project, but I would routinely at least go out to the site as the safety person and just check it out. So I got a call on my radio in the morning that there was a problem at the site. I went out to the site, and this is what I saw. The edge of the excavation had sloughed off, and I saw workers with their bare hands I even have a hard time talking about it. trying to dig their fellow worker out of the dirt. And there's nothing so helpless as when you're seeing somebody who you know is probably going to die and you can't save them. Even though I was not directly involved in the project, what a helpless feeling. Tucson Medical Center had the best trauma center in the city, Trauma One. Who comes out and joins me but the chief trauma surgeon, a person who went on to become Surgeon General of the United States, Richard Carmona, under the Bush administration. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and we knew. So what came out of that was a growing understanding of how critical engineering is to doing the job right. You know, it is a noble profession. Think about that. Can drive you to make the right decisions and push for the kind of things that Dr. Gibson talked about in the first presentation. All right, it gets better. It gets better. So, later in my career, I became not a miner, but I actually was a safety professional at a smelter. Most people know Arizona is a big copper mining state, and I joined what had been more or less a locally owned copper firm, Magma Copper, that was bought by the Australians in the 90s, and I was involved in several large projects that finally started using prevention through design, my exposure, as part of the project specifications. Now, they used a pretty rigorous auditing system in general to establish the safety culture, but I must tell you that the pre-planning, which again Ed is very familiar with and an expert in, was really the core towards evaluating the hazards right down to the subcontractor level and validating that you had things in place, including good engineering, to take care of these kind of exposures. I talk about the rod plant upgrade and copper concentrate line dust collection. I'll just talk to you about the latter. So the way this process worked was, once you had copper concentrate, very dusty product, you had to blow it into a furnace to create copper matte, and then you draw off the pure copper from the bottom of the furnace. Ed, every day, with my big heavy work boots on, I went over and went on top of a furnace that was burning at about 2,700 degrees, and you could feel, like almost the vibration from all of that thermal energy being contained. The good news is if the furnace blew up, I wouldn't feel anything, because I'd be instantly vaporized. That's the good news. The bad news is that we struggled to keep the lead, arsenic, and cadmium dust levels below the action level as established by OSHA. It's a very dusty environment. This dust collection upgrade was going to do two things, and think about this, because we talk about the economic value of prevention through design. It was going to essentially cut the dust level down by about 90%, right? So that not as many people workers would be on the lead, arsenic, and cadmium protocols, which meant all kinds of medical surveillance, extra time spent in terms of showering, that kind of stuff. And all of that dust that previously was floating around the plant, guess what? Those were lost dollars. So if you could literally capture it and blow it into the furnace, the company was going to make more money. Hey, that's interesting. It's not just a safety thing, it's an economic thing. And we're talking a lot. I was asked to do a return on health and safety investment, and it was felt that the payoff, the $40 million that it was costing to retain that good design, the payoff was 3.5 years. How about that? Again, think about it in terms of economics, in terms of convincing the management, if they didn't have to be convinced at all, that this is a money maker. So, oh, there's a picture of the rod plant. So, I'll say one thing about safety through design on the rod plant. Where that was known, it's funny, I remember, it's called the palletizer. The palletizer, where this almost pure copper wire that would eventually be made into like telephone lines and things of that nature would be stacked on a pallet, and they put in a very sophisticated interlock system so that if a person got within so many inches of the operating equipment, it would stop, right? Can you imagine the damage this kind of a machine could do to a human body? So the upgrade included using much more sophisticated controls. And again, all of this was driven by the reality that if there was an accident, you would shut this very, very lucrative line down, hours, days, even months. Let me talk a little bit about your Australian connection. Because the company was now owned by an outside entity, the Australians' threshold for risk acceptance had moved down, which meant they were very, very progressive, you can use that term, as far as pushing even their American subsidiaries to do this kind of work. So I'll leave you with that thought, that this was really my mind opening up to not only the value of the safety side, but also the economic side for doing the job right the first time, and directly engaging engineering personnel far upstream at the concept point all the way through final design, and then commissioning, and then operation. Okay, let me talk to you about the wonderful world of astronomy. So, the guy who started out in the cannery, worked his way through, other jobs, was asked to do some work with two projects that were being managed by the University of Arizona. You may know that the University of Arizona is really a center for astronomy, and the first project was a solar telescope on the island of Maui on top of Haleakala. And this was direct viewing of the sun. So it was a daytime telescope. Imagine, if you will, what happens when you point an 8.4 mirror directly at the sun? It gets hot. It gets hot. So this was one of the only mirrors in the world that's water cooled. So just the environmental issues alone called for a commitment to a prevention through design philosophy starting way up the line. Now, what was really prescient in this particular project was that the engineer at the time was a believer in reading about what was going on in the world of system safety and felt that he could influence the commitment of the project to formalize the PtD approach by using Cliff Erickson's book. Do you have a copy of that book, Dr. Gibson, by any? This sounds like a plant to me.
It's an outstanding book.
We don't share any of the financial benefits, but this book by Erickson is really quite impressive. And he was able to get the other people who were involved in this project, including National Science Foundation, the main financial sponsor, to buy off on this. That project was commissioned a couple of years ago, and some of the images that they're getting from the direct viewing of the sun and the coronal structure are just pretty amazing. Now, the other project used to be called the Large Synoptic Survey Project and changed to the Vera C. Rubin Project. That one I have been involved with for about 8 years as a consultant. Most of the work I've done was part of a group of other health and safety professionals, third-party review, not necessarily auditing, but high-level questions about exposure to hazards, but also are those hazards being verified periodically as the project moves towards completion? Oh, I'm sorry. So that's not a great view. If you look at the side monitors, I'll give you an example of prevention through design. It's interesting. So let me talk a little bit about the camera. One of the early issues was access to the camera. The camera is massive. The camera is as big as an SUV. The camera is the largest electronic camera on Earth, CCD camera, 3.2 gigapixels. So it sucks up data at a phenomenal rate. Just moving the data from a mountaintop in Chile to the rest of the world required not one but two undersea cables. The access to the camera was looked at very carefully through this prevention through design process. And no ladders. The access platforms are literally on hydraulic mechanisms, right? So when you don't need people to work on the camera, they move away, right? No ladders. When you do need people, they go right to the edge with proper stops, right? The camera, the electronic rafts, I'm giving you some of the technical aspects, the electronic rafts generate so much heat that the camera has to be water cooled or glycol cooled. So again, the environmental issues are real. I can say this because it's a publicly funded project. The entire project, if you count the 10-year survey after what they call first light, you know, when they commission fully the camera, It's about $1 billion project. The camera alone, are you ready, is $168 million. A lot more than your Apple camera. But it's an amazing instrument that will survey the complete southern hemisphere in three nights, the complete. But more importantly, and I'm going to show you this, it was 2 years ago, we asked the principals of the project to comment on prevention through design. And I want to play, a couple slides up, some of their comments. And I'd like you to think about it as you hear them, as engineers and designers, the power of people working together for common purpose on not getting people hurt, but also running a project so smoothly that other aspects of the project are enhanced, including communication. So this is like an intermediary slide, but basically, and I think you'll see it when you see the video, project leadership, their commitment to identify and control the hazards is, again, foundational. Formal processes, it might be rudimentary, but it might be more sophisticated in the case of these telescopes. It will really drive other aspects of the success. I think we've talked about that. And then I've often asked myself this, does safety culture drive prevention through design, or does prevention through design drive the safety culture? Maybe somebody will have a comment about that after I'm done with the formal. So these are the people that I've worked with for pretty close to 10 years. Project manager Victor Krabendam, Austin Roberts, he's the lead systems engineering entity, and then Chuck Gessner with his then young daughter, safety manager. Here's, and if somebody wants this documentation, I could probably get it because it is a public project. But again, this is just an example of the hazard analysis plan. So from the get-go, they started the formal process, right, where everybody was involved, all the critical individuals were involved, including the international subcontractors. Everybody had to prove that they had identified the specific hazards, integrated them into their project plan, and then documented it appropriately. Hazard register. The project is distinguished by a very, very constant and accurate assessment of the hazards for operating the project, but also constructing the project, right? So they've done a magnificent job, in my opinion, of detailing the kinds of things that have to be verified and validated as you get closer to first light. This being done well can help immensely when the project goes into operation. Does that make sense? If it's done up to that point, there's huge benefit for the rest of the 10-year surveillance. Here's an example of the hazard analysis form. It's just the blank. Again, if somebody wants to get a hold of this, we can figure out with David how to do it. They use risk analysis. You've probably seen some variation of this in your work. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, maybe Daniel can help me out. So we're going to play about 2 or 3 minutes of this. I think it starts at about the 50-second mark. And this was at a workshop.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate that. I'd like to introduce the third member. And what has been the most significant lesson for you as project manager and safety manager for sustaining PtD leadership during this project? I think we can start with Austin.
Yeah, I think one of the most important lessons that we've probably learned on this project and looking at it from a systems engineering and technical standpoint is that safety has to be designed in. It's not something that you can do after the fact. You have to have a focus on safety from the very beginning. And the other lesson I would say is it takes continual analysis throughout every stage of the development of a project and constant communication. We always have to be communicating that safety is first. You know, schedules get crunched, people get fatigued, people get tired, and it takes constant communication to kind of remind everyone that safety takes precedence over anything else.
And I'll add a little bit to that too. So the stop work authority also helps with that communication too. It's not a bad thing, it's a good thing that if you don't understand a particular procedure or task or something's going awry, then anyone within the organization can do stop work authority. Also, I think important for this group of engineers is that if you're going to be a project manager, you can't just skirt safety to the safety department. So I'll just say that Victor and I have had a long-lasting partnership in safety management in this project. And I think that's very successful because he's provided that leadership along with me. But, you know, people are going to listen to the project manager probably more than the safety guy. So he's been very good about that, and I really do appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure to work with him all these years.
Yeah, let me just, I think my answer would be something that we covered in the video, and I think I would just reaffirm the importance of establishing the cultures and the tools and the processes as early as possible, really at the very onset of the project, because these endeavors are long, they're complicated, they're unpredictable, as you might have seen in one of the slides there. You know, and oftentimes the focus is during that early design phase, but really what happens is there's also design that continues on. You know, when we get into fabrication and construction elements, it's easy to focus on the emerging issues that we're faced with. But without this strong background, without the culture, the tooling in place, it's just too easy to get distracted and to lose the focus on these really important principles.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Gentlemen, we're already happy.
Okay. So it kind of gives you a flavor of the kind of leadership that it really takes to make this, even in a, admittedly, a very complex project work. Driven from the top, but you have a process to support and validate how this actually happens. Okay, just a couple of other things and then I'm going to wrap it up. PtD is fully integrated into the project management for each phase. Early risk analysis is the key. Besides the Ericsson inspiration, they use MilSpec, Military Specification 882, which is the system safety guidance. Engineers and others should drive the process, right? Own the process. And don't leave out the major equipment manufacturers. And I think to Ed's earlier point, don't leave out the maintenance people who are going to have to be dealing with what you designed and what was actually ultimately built. And then effective communication to accurately track implementation. Because if somebody asks the question, well, why? you will have the record leading up to, including the, the hardware, the installation, the maintenance, all of that will be part of it. And then here are the conclusions. It is a critical skill for all of you. It's going to become even more critical because the threshold and the tolerance for risk at a corporate level, look at the best example lately is Boeing, right? That could be a multi-billion dollar loss for a formerly, well-respected provider of commercial and military aircraft. So if you think safety doesn't pay, look at some of these big time issues. And I don't have an easy answer to the Boeing issue, but the reality is there are billions and billions of dollars being contemplated because of decisions that were made either long-term, short-term. And we'll see how that unfolds. But that's why the engineering is so critical. And these skills really do enhance the ability to make those decisions. Hazard identification, fundamental, but often it doesn't happen. Talked about leading the process, and safety culture, good project management should include good risk management, right? By definition. The two cannot be separated. And again, this is the question. Safety culture is both advanced by and drives PtD. So I'm going to wrap it up right there in the interest of time. And I don't know if if people want to ask me questions during the break or whatever, because I know we're on a tight schedule. What do you think, David?
We'll have time for maybe a couple of questions, and then we can
sure.
take the questions during the break.
Yeah.
Any questions?
And if there aren't any questions, you can approach me, informally. But okay. Well, again, thank you for the opportunity to share my my journey.